I spoke to Adam Creighton a little earlier before coming on air. He's the Australian's Washington correspondent. I wanted to get his take on what all this means.
Well, look, it's a fairly arcane decision, and it was somewhat a surprise. Essentially, the Supreme Court has said that their interpretation of the Constitution and the law is that the president, and that's, of course, regardless of who the president is, not just Donald Trump, could be any president, is effectively immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts. So that entails things such as foreign policy, national security, cabinet appointments, all sorts of other appointments. And the court said, though, that the non-official acts of the president are not immune from prosecution. So that could be related to campaign events or anything related to the political party that they represent. Look, there's been a huge amount of hysterical reaction over here saying that this decision means that the president can, shoot people, assassinate people. That's really ridiculous stuff. And I think that that's more coloured by the fact that Democrats are furious that the practical import of this decision means that the various federal charges against Donald Trump won't be able to proceed before November.
As you say, the Democrat reaction has been hysterical. It's almost as if they're suggesting that democracy is being overturned, whereas I think you can interpret this as the opposite, really. This is the Supreme Court saying democracy should hold precedence. Democratic processes should hold precedence over the sort of lawfare that we've been seeing.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. The impeachment process of any president, of course, is still in place. So that's very much a political process. But of course, there's also the electoral cycle too. Every 4 years, the voters get to give their verdict. So I think these far-fetched scenarios about having Americans killed are completely ridiculous. The biggest thing here really for Democrats at the moment, frankly, is not the court decision so much. It's the state of the current president, Joe Biden. And I thought it was very interesting today, very telling, that in his brief press conference about the SCOTUS decision, he didn't take any questions, which is pretty extraordinary stuff, really. Obviously, there were a lot of questions to ask, the main one being, are you going to step down? Are you going to step aside? But he didn't even take those questions, which I think is somewhat telling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The telling thing here was that Joe Biden has used this as an opportunity to look presidential, have something to say, but it was tightly scripted, on auto cue, no questions, and off he went. Let's have a look at some of that. Here he is talking about the decision.
Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police, the ransacking of the Capitol.
Yeah, that's a tired old line, Adam, this idea that Donald Trump sent a violent mob to the Capitol. I mean, there's just no evidence, is there? They're being misleading. Donald Trump said he wanted a peaceful protest.
Yes. Yeah, no, look, that's exactly right. And, the further this event moves into the rearview mirror, the more and more statements like that people can get away with, because people are just forgetting what actually happened. They can't remember the facts of the day. And as you point out, I mean, he did not send those people to the Capitol. That is just absurd. I mean, it's factually incorrect. I mean, look, he may have done wrong things in relation to, to trying to subvert the election. That's, I think that's up in the air. I don't have a strong view on that. It's very technical. It's very complicated. But I mean, as for this, blatant lie that, that he orchestrated that riot, that's absurd.
Yeah, agreed. I'm very critical of Donald Trump for not conceding defeat. I think democracy hinges on the loser's consent, but that doesn't mean you can pin that riot and violent behaviour on him. It seems absurd. Let's go to some more of what Joe Biden had to say, because this is where he says effectively the courts aren't going to do it for us. It's up to the American people and democracy to make this choice.
The American people must decide. They want to entrust the president once again, the presidency, to Donald Trump, now knowing he'll be even more emboldened to do whatever he pleases whenever he wants to do it.
Yeah, Adam, to me, this is where it always should have been, right? I know you've been saying the same. The Democrats, to defeat Donald Trump, should be looking at democratic processes and the election to do that rather than legal processes. And it seems that this decision has forced the Democrats to actually confront that reality. But more than that, surely if Joe Biden thinks Donald Trump is such a threat to democracy, then the most important thing he could do is stand down, say he won't recontest, and let the Democrats run a decent candidate.
Well, look, that's, that is probably true. Although the logistics of changing candidates now, I must say, are very difficult for the Democrats. I mean, the main one, from my point of view, is the fact that, the Biden-Harris campaigns raised something like $200 million. And illegally, there is no way to give that money to any other candidate except for Kamala Harris. So really, if he does stand aside, the only candidate that they'll have really is Kamala Harris. And it may well be that that's what they end up with. I mean, it's quite possible that Joe Biden's decline accelerates in the next few months and they just absolutely have to get rid of him for Harris. But, these ideas of California's governor or Michigan's governor stepping in, I think this is fairly fanciful. And just back to your first point, I mean, you're quite right. Joe Biden's remarks just earlier underscored the fact that there's still very much a democratic check on presidents in the US, regardless of what the Supreme Court says. And just finally on the court case, I mean, it's really not as revolutionary as people are saying. I mean, there was a 1982 court case related to Richard Nixon, where the Supreme Court said that the president was completely immune from civil suits. And so really, this is just taking that one step further to the criminal side of things.
Great to get your analysis, Adam. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.